What's happening, comic fans? It is Mike from the Hardcover Comic here. Hope you've all been doing well, staying safe and sound. Today, in this video, I wanted to talk about Scott Snyder, a writer in the comic book industry who's been around for quite a bit, 15 years, maybe more than that, doing amazing work. We're going to talk about titles that I consider must-read titles from Scott. Amazing stories that I really enjoy, that I've reread multiple times, that I highly suggest checking out if you're a fan of Scott Snyder, if you haven't read them already. Real quick, before we dive into that, I want to mention the amazing sponsor of our channel, organicpricebooks.com, the #1 place to go if you ask Matt or myself for your hardcovers, omnibuses, deluxe editions, absolutes. Amazing customer service, amazing shipping, amazing selection and prices. Can't recommend them enough. We've got promo codes on the screen, THC2 and THC ship it together. Promo codes down in the description below and on the screen if you've been watching. Now let's talk about Scott Snyder. We'll look at some of the artwork for these books. We'll talk about the story a little bit, spoiler free as much as possible, and hope you all enjoy. Now, before I get started with even a single title, let me just say I can't cover every single title Scott Snyder has done. I wish I could, but my brain doesn't have enough capacity to do that and then sit in front of a camera and make a video all about every single title he's done. So I'm going to do must-read titles that I think you all should check out because I personally really love the books. That doesn't mean anything disparaging towards titles that I don't mention on this video. Now, let's dive into series number 1, Batman. Of course, we'll get the best, well, one of the best out of the way. A fantastic series, essentially spanning the entirety of the new 52 issues with a bunch of annuals, various other one-shots like Future's End, Zero Year, things like that. An amazing run that really guided a big portion of the new 52 in terms of the stories being told and leading up into an incredibly massive and involved event called Dark Knight's Metal. Loved it so much. Greg Capullo primarily doing the artwork with Scott Snyder. You've also got Dustin Nguyen in there, Jason Fabok. A lot of incredible artists, especially considering not only did Scott Snyder take the reins on Batman, the main series in the New 52, but out of that spawned a weekly series called Batman Eternal, where Scott Snyder, with a group of other writers, was writing a weekly series that lasted 52 issues involving pretty much everyone in the Batman universe. Fantastic stuff. Such a great run. You've got Batman and Robin Eternal eventually as well. And then not only once Batman was done, Scott Snyder then took the reins with All-Star, Batman, and other miniseries. So if you're a fan of Batman, I can't recommend it enough. Scott Snyder's take is got a lot more detective work to it. He's always crafting universes and stories and history in his runs and arcs and series. It's a very noticeable theme with Scott Snyder, as he likes to leave his own little imprint on the history of a character or a universe, which can be good, can be bad. It depends how particular you are with your universes, how much reverence you hold for them and the status quo that they maintain. But I personally really enjoy it, and Batman had some really great takes on Batman, really great definitions of characters and villains and rogues. Can't recommend it enough. Next up, Witches. Witches is a 6-issue miniseries published by Image Comics, written by Scott Snyder with artwork by Jock. A fantastic short horror story that really makes you feel gross by the end of it. Definitely not one of those books where you're getting pop-up horror. It's almost impossible to do in regular comic books as it is anyway, to get that jump scare. But it's a really creepy, haunting story about this girl sailor and her family. You get to see a lot of the history of the family, but essentially the family has moved to a new town where Sailor is now being tormented by these trees, these witches, these sounds that she continues to hear, and people are having a hard time believing her, and her parents are having a hard time believing her, and things keep escalating more and more and more. It's very tough to talk about this series without spoiling things, so I won't say too much and I will tread very carefully. It is only 6 issues, so you're getting an entire story within a single traditional arc. I highly recommend it though, because it is a really well crafted story. You get to see a lot of the history of the family, a lot of twists and turns and surprise elements coming into the story. None of it really feels like a Deus Ex Machina or anything. It's really well thought out. And even the ending is actually, it's one of those endings where at the moment when you read it, you may not be fully satisfied, but give it a couple days and let the feeling wash over you of the story and the creepiness of it all. Jock's artwork suits the tone of the book perfectly. He's got that eerie, edgy, the dark lines. It works so incredibly well with the title. I really love Witches. Scott Snyder's done a bunch of horror titles. We'll be talking about more of them later in this video. But Witches is definitely one of my favorites and probably my favorite mini-series that he's done. Next up, American Vampire. American Vampire was probably the book that I really fell in love with Scott Snyder thanks to. I think I forget what came first for me, Batman or American Vampire. Either way, American Vampire was the one that caught me in a way that Batman couldn't necessarily catch me. And the reason for that is because it's independent. It's Scott Snyder's own creation. So American Vampire focuses on a handful of characters that interact in a world where essentially there's a new type of vampire. You've got the traditional European vampire, nocturnal, can't go out in the sunlight, needs blood on a regular basis to survive, doesn't necessarily have any drastic transformations, can turn into a bat, things like that. And now within this book, you've got a new evolution of the vampire, the American vampire. So what's really cool about this story, there are so many layers to it. There's so much amazing storytelling, so many amazing stories. What Scott Snyder did with this book is really explore the history of the world with these American vampires in mind. How long have they been around? What have they been doing since then? How have they spread? Have vampires changed even more since then, that in a way that hasn't been revealed yet? So many different aspects being explored within the story. The main, I guess, sort of vampire that you deal with is Skinner Sweet. He's the recurring character within all these stories, whether it's the mainline American Vampire book, whether it's one of the mini-series, 1976, whatever it may be. He's a recurring character, and honestly, he's such an incredible character. I love Skinner Sweet so much. He's not a character you should like, but as a character, he's so complex and developed, and has that he has unlikable characteristics, but a likable personality, which is kind of a problem in terms of characters. But it speaks to how well Scott Snyder can write a character if he wants to make a really complex one in a world that's already, so challenging to keep track of with all the various history that he's implanted. He's got Stephen King writing minis within the first, I think it was like 12 issues, writing backup stories within the same American Vampire universe. It's amazing. There are 2 omnis for collecting the entirety of everything that is American Vampire. I highly recommend checking it out. And I, of course, should have mentioned Raphael Albuquerque on artwork throughout this. God damn it. And I should have, of course, mentioned Raphael Albuquerque on artwork. Amazing stuff. I always love his artwork, and American Vampire is probably some of the best work he's ever done. Can't recommend it enough, especially if you're a fan of supernatural horror. Let's jump back into DC for a little bit with Dark Knights. Now, I'm going to include both metal and death metal in this because they are within the Dark Knights banner. They're not necessarily part of Scott Snyder's Batman run, but they're a holistic DC Universe events that I think deserve to be part of Scott Snyder's must-read. I mean, of course, there are many other creators working with Scott Snyder on an event like this, but technically he is sort of captaining the thing and leading the main direction of the event, with the main series with Greg Capullo, and then probably subplotting with all the other creators involved in the event in general. A really cool concept, a really epic scale concept that looks at, what if there was a dark multiverse where there were, Batmen that took over everything. Really incredibly told story. The Batman Who Laughs is probably one of the most terrifying villains I've ever read in a superhero Big Two comic. And what happens with the Batman Who Laughs throughout the course of these events is pretty biblical in scale relative to DC's universe. Really incredible stuff going on, integrating everything that's been happening with Rebirth and even the Watchmen. So well done. I won't say more than that. The Omni for Metal has come out, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure Death Metal will get one in the future. So highly recommend picking those up if you get the chance. Next up is Nocterra. Nocterra, written by Scott Snyder with artwork by Tony S. Daniel. I was very surprised by this story. I know both creators very well. I've enjoyed Scott Snyder's image work for the most part. But seeing initial images, it kind of looked like another sci-fi, cyberpunky kind of book. I didn't really look into it all that much. And so being able to read it was actually a really pleasant surprise because it's a fantastic, fantastic book. It essentially focuses on a character named Val Riggs, aka Sundog, who is a ferryman. They ferry people from one outpost to another, or wherever their destination may be. They may have other cargo as well as we progress throughout the story and maybe learn more about them. But essentially, they're people living in a world that has been hit by the big PM and are now necessary in order to transport people from one outpost to another. The universe is a universe in which one day clouds, something formed over the earth that was essentially blocking all the sunlight. And within, I think it was 10 hours, within 10 hours, people were starting to transform. Any living being that didn't get sunlight started to transform as a result of the lack of sunlight. And so ever since the big PM, sort of the calendar has restarted within this universe. And the story itself takes place within 13 PM, which can essentially be considered year 13 after the big PM. That's kind of where you're at with the storyline. And these creatures that transform, they turn into shades, and these shades are terrifying creatures that have melded together and evolved together after 13 years. So you're really being tossed into this universe that is, first of all, already really a cool concept to begin with as a baseline, and now you're 13 years into it, so you get to see how it's changed and how it's evolved. And I think this was a really fun thing for Scott Snyder to do, is explore this kind of world and build it and sort of provide some more history to it over time. At the moment, I think there are 13 issues out for this, so it's still ongoing. I know it's returning in March of 2023. After a relatively long hiatus, but it's Tony Daniel doing the artwork, and if he needs to take his time, he can, because his art is incredible. So many beautiful action sequences, so many great character designs and city designs and outpost designs. Like I said, the concept for the story is really great. I gave a general overview of what is just happening in the universe, and without really getting into the details of the story. Essentially, Val is escorting people that could potentially bring back the light. That's all I'm going to say. You find that out in issue 1. There are obviously nefarious characters coming after her. The ferrymen are contract workers, and there are people that know about them. Anyway, I don't want to spoil much, but things escalate very quickly in this series, and I'm very much enjoying it. I highly recommend you check it out. The last title I want to mention is another book that is still ongoing currently. I do feel like it's kind of a cheat move to say this title, because it's not just Scott Snyder. Undiscovered Country, written by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, with artwork by Giuseppe Camuncoli. This is a title, again, I feel like it might be cheating a little bit because Charles Soule is involved as well, but the fact that these two gentlemen decided they needed to team up to write a story like this tells me, you know what, I got to give them both equal credit. The story is another one of those grand epic scale stories where there's a universe that you're being tossed into, a sort of a post-apocalyptic universe, if you will. America has been split up into multiple different areas and nations. Areas are hoarding resources. Things have become very corrupt. There are prehistoric creatures in the mix now. All sorts of other supernatural and what used to be, I guess, even at times fictional possibilities have become realities within this world. Everyone's trying to climb the wall, essentially, and get over the wall, get in on the other side of the wall. And you've got this group of characters from various different backgrounds: politicians, scientists, researchers, journalists, military individuals, all coming together to go on a mission after they receive a message from within the wall. So already you've got another very interesting concept surrounded by multiple layers of mystery, and all those layers slowly start to come apart, very slowly start to come apart in a satisfying way as you follow this group of characters as they discover what lies, how they've been lied, how they've been manipulated, that there may be a conspiracy at play here, what is actually happening within the wall, who is in charge, how did that person get in charge, and what their plans are for the rest of the world. Really fascinating book, all with the motivation of these characters needing to get what is essentially a cure for a disease that is rampant throughout the rest of the world. I really enjoy it. Coming on the wave of the pandemic, my interest in it waned a little bit because the main focal point of the story is fixing a problem, a disease, but the general idea of the story is incredible. I've read the first, I think, 14 issues. Highly recommend it. I can't wait for this to be collected one day in a deluxe or an omnibus once the story is complete, because I think this will be one of those books that, as a whole, reading it within a sitting or 2 or 3 will be the best way to experience it and will be an incredible experience. So can't recommend checking out the series enough. If you like world building, if you like mysteries, and there is a lot of action to it, of course, it's a post-apocalyptic sort of story. Can't recommend checking out Undiscovered Country enough. So that's 6 titles. There are, of course, plenty more by Scott Snyder. You've got The Wake, you've got Superman Unchained, his Swamp Thing run. Was it Severed? No. Oh, what was it called? Severed, I think. Another mini horror series he did. Either way, you can Google it, look it up on Wikipedia. Lots of other books from Scott Snyder. He's a fantastic creator and writer. So I highly recommend checking out all his work, but those titles in particular are ones that I really enjoy and would put my stamp on. Please let us know down in the comment section below what you think. Are there any Scott Snyder books you really enjoy? Let us know down in the comment section below so that others can pick up those books as well and check them out. Thank you all very much for tuning in. One more time, check out organicpricebooks.com. Promo codes down in the description below to get you extra money off the already solid discounts on there. Thank you all very much for tuning in. This is Mike from the Hardcover Comic. Until next time, you stay classy, Internet.